So here we have an Alteryx starter workflow ready to go. So what I've built in here is just a simple text input with a prime candidate. I've just put in 13. I've changed that to be a big integer, and we're just outputting it to a browse tool. I've also got in here a whole lot of pro tip prompters. So as we work through each one of those, we'll drop back and just show you that one referencing the PowerPoint. So let's get going. So how do we know that this is a prime number? Those of you with a maths background will know the definition of a prime number is a number that only divides by itself and 1, and it has no factors that divide evenly into it. So to test whether that's got any factors that divide evenly into it, let's go and create some candidate factors. And we're going to use this generate rows tool. So I'm going to generate rows maybe 1 to 7. And we're going to call them factor candidates. And I'm going to start with 2, and we're going to add 1 to each one of them. So instead of using row count, I'll use factor candidate. I think that should be factor candidate. And I'm going to do a condition expression. So I want to loop around and add 1 until I hit about the halfway mark. So let's save ourselves a bit of typing. We'll paste it into here. So let's see, that's a factor candidate. Keep going until the factor candidate is less than or equal to the prime candidate divided by 2, and we'll add 1 for luck. So let's see how that one goes. So now we've got 6 rows of data, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. So they're good factor candidates. Let's go and see if any of those divide evenly into 13. So let's create a formula, and we'll call that one is factor. So we know if it's a factor if the prime candidate, well, sorry, if the mod, which is the formula for determining the leftovers, prime candidate divided by the factor candidate. So if that equals 0, then we'll say that's a 1. So we'll make that a boolean, else 0, end if. And we want to make that a we'll make that a byte instead of 1 or a 0. Alright, let's give that a run, see if it works. So we know 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, none of those are factors. Let's try that for say 12, which we know is not a prime number. And we can see that 2, 3, 4 and 6 are in fact factors. So we know any one of those is a 1, we know that this is not a prime. So let's build that in to an Alteryx formula. And the way that we're going to do that is to do a summarize tool. So let's grab our summarize tool here, and we're going to group all of those rows of data for each prime candidate, and we're going to have a look at the is factor, and we're going to have a look at the max one. So the max one is going to be, if it's a 1, then we know that it is not a prime. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is run that one and have a look. We can see that number 12 is not a prime. Let's give that a test run. Let's see that 13, and it should be is not a prime. So again, that's a little confusing, double negative. Why don't we just clean that up a bit by saying we'll say is prime, and we'll go if is not prime equals 1, then 0. Oops, then 0, else 1, end if. Then we'll turn it around. Let's give that a quick test run, and we'll see that number 13 is a prime, and number 12 is not a prime. Cool, alright, we've got the bones of what we now need to build ourselves a macro. So far we test one prime number at a time. What we need to do is test a whole lot of prime numbers in an iterative way, and let's go and do that with a macro. So the best way to start your macro is to add an output tool from the interface palette. So if I go macro output up here, and we drag that up there, now we see these little extra symbols appear. We know that we're in macro land. So let's also add another output, and we're going to make this the iterative output down this way. So let us first of all go with pro tip 1. So remember, pro tip 1 was about telling your Alteryx designer what type of macro you got. So we want to set it up for iterative macro. Let's go into the workflow config, workflow iterative macro. Let's see if we can find that one. So if you click anywhere on the canvas, you'll get the workflow configuration. You click on the workflow tab, there's our macro, and we drop that one down, and hey presto, we're now got an iterative macro. So pro tip number 2 was telling Alteryx which one of these two is our output by labeling them. So let's give that a go now. So if I click on this first output here, I'm going to call this one our prime number output, and I'll give that a P for an anchor. And on this one here, I'm going to call this one iteration. Okay, so we go back to pro tip 2, and we'll see that we need to define this iteration output. Let's go and find out where that is. That's in the interface designer. So the interface designer is available in your view menu. You see it down there. It's not on by default, or you can use the shortcut Control-Alt-D. And once you've got that up here, you go down to this little properties tab here, and you'll see that the iteration input, I haven't got one of those yet, so I might just convert this one to an input. Cool, now we've got an iteration input, and now I have to choose which one of these is my iteration output. So there it is, my iteration. While we're here, we'll have a look at this endpoint condition. Remember before I said we want to, while we're developing, we'll keep this as a low number. Let's keep it down at number 5, and let's turn that into a warning. That was pro tip 5, you might remember. That was how we changed that number of iterations, and then we'll come back later and finish that when we're ready to put our end condition in. Pro tip 4 is about processing your raw data ready for output, separate thinking to getting your output. So let me show you how I'm going to deal with that one. So let's grab a select tool from our favorites, and we're going to say, well, when we want to output our results here, we really want to only put out our prime candidate, and we want to see whether it's prime or not. And let's turn off the unknowns here. Whereas for our iteration, we really want to make sure that what goes in goes out again. So we know that at the moment the only thing that's coming in here is this prime candidate. So we need to make sure, as per pro tip 3, that we need to have the same number of columns that go in that go out. So let's go and change this one. We're going to turn off all of the other ones, even the unknowns. We're just going to have the prime candidate go back around, and we'll obviously we need to increment that one, but we'll worry about that one in just a second. First of all, let's give this a test run. So at the moment we've still got a YXMD. We haven't actually saved this as a macro yet. So let's do a save as, and we're going to save this one in our iterative macros demo, and we're going to call this one iterative macro demo. Notice the file suffix is YXMC. That means it's a macro now. And to use that macro, why don't we open back up the original starter. And what we'll do is we'll insert a macro here. So right mouse click, insert. Right down the bottom of the list here, you'll see the word macro. I'll grab that iterative macro demo, pop that in here, and you'll see that there's our little anchor for the P. Let's give it a run and see if it works, shall we? So now we have 5 iterations, as we said, and we can see that they're all prime candidate 13. Alright, so we're ready for our next step. We need to really start thinking about how we're going to iterate this macro now. So let's go back to our macro, and let's build in an incrementer. So we might just skinny this one up a bit here, gives a bit more room. So before we output these columns, let's grab another formula. And what we're going to do is we're simply going to change our prime candidate. So if the prime candidate is, let's do something a little bit smarter, make it a bit faster. So if our prime candidate is 2, then we want to increment it to 3. Else, now we don't just want to add 1 to every prime candidate. Why don't we just skip all the even numbers and we'll add 2. And we'll see if that one gets us the results that we want. So let's save that one, and notice how, because we haven't ticked unknown, we're only getting that 1 prime candidate coming through. And the other thing that I need to also deal with is I do know that the first prime number is 2, so we better just add an if the prime candidate equals 2, then 1. Else if. Alright, so that'll deal with that little edge case. So I think we're ready to run this one again now. So we'll save that one, and now when we go back to our macro starter, we'll get a little warning to say that we've changed our macro. Click OK. Let's give it a run and see how we're going. So now we're starting at 13, 15, 17, 19, and we're starting to count those primes up. So let's pop this one back to our first prime that we want to test for, 2. We'll run it, and you can see it's running 5 times, and we're counting those primes as we go. So we've got the first 5. Now let's go and build our end condition so that we can stop it when we hit the 100th prime. So let's go back to our macro and build in a counter. Now we know that we want to count the number of primes and send that out of the output. So what's our rule? Whatever goes out must come in. So let's build it into the input first. We'll call this one prime counter, and we know that when we first start we've got a 0 count. And what we want to do is we want to decide whether we want that to go out of our output. So to get it to go out of our output, we've got to include it in our summarize aggregation. So let's go prime counter, we'll just add that to our group by. Just test that that's going to come out here. Prime counter is 0, so we want it to flow through here. Let's add it to here, and we'll also add it to our output as well. But we want to build in a rule that we want to add our prime count. Oh, hang on. First of all, we need to make sure that that prime counter is bigger than a byte. Let's change it to say int 32. And we're going to modify it. Each time it goes through, if there is a prime number encountered, we want to add 1 to it. So let's go prime counter. So it's a simple test. If is prime, then let's add 1 to our prime counter. Oops. Try that again. Prime counter plus 1. But if it isn't a prime, we just leave the prime counter as it was. Does that make sense? Cool. Alright, so let's give that a test run, make sure she's not breaking. We'll save that one. And let's go and see if our prime counter is working when we run it out here. No. There you go. So our rule of what goes in must come out again. So what we've got in here is we've only got the prime candidate going. We need to add in our prime counter into here too. Start off with 0. Let's give that a run. We're getting 5 results out, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's counting our primes. All right, we're ready for the next step. So what was our I think it was pro tip 5, we need to decide how we're going to end our iteration. So let's add in a little filter tool in here to stop it going through the iterative output once we hit our 100th prime. Let's go and see if we can build that in. So we'll grab the filter tool here, pop it in here, make a bit of room, and our condition is if the prime counter is less than 100. We want it to loop around and have another go, but if as soon as it's 100, we want it to stop. Does that make sense? Alright, let's give it a save, and we'll go back and we'll go to run now. One last thing, same pro tip. Remember we set that back down to a low number to help us with our development. We now need to ramp that one back up to a number bigger than 5. So let's put 1,000 back in there. Let's save our macro and we'll give it a run. So how many seconds do you reckon it'll take Alteryx to work out the 100th prime number? Just thinking about it. So we've got it finishing in 20 seconds. We now have all the way down here, and we've got to our 100th prime number. The 100th prime number is 541. Cool, we're almost there. So let's have a last look at our pro tips. I think we don't have an iteration number in there yet. So just for the purposes of our demo, let's go and have an iteration number that we want to output. So let's go back into our macro and I'll show you how to build that in. So we better build it into here if we want it to output. So we're going to go in and add a new formula in here. We'll call it iteration, and this is where we're going to show you where to find that iteration number. So it's in your little X here. Go down here, there's this thing called constants, and now we have this extra one here called iteration number. So just like we mentioned before, make sure you add a 1 in there so your first one won't be 0, and we better make that an integer. And if we want it to output, we better go and tell it to output, so we'll just add this one here in our iteration. And look, one last thing that you might want to do to simplify your output, you might want to actually copy this one, and we say we only really want to see an output if it is the 100th one. So prime counter equals 100, give us the output for just one row of data. Let's give that another test run and see how we go. So what we're expecting now is this one row of data with an iteration number in there as well, and it's telling us what our 100th prime is. I'm sure we could probably tune this macro up a little bit more. Let's see, we've got, there we go, 271 iterations were run, and we found our prime candidate 541 was the 100th prime. So there you go. So I think we're doing pretty well for time. Let's go back and just have a quick recap on all of our pro tips. So we just going to reiterate what we've told you today. So very important to make sure that Alteryx knows it's an iterative macro in our workflow configuration. Don't forget to label your outputs, making it very easy to tell Alteryx in your interface designer which one of your outputs is going to be the iterative one. Be sure to keep an eye on that what goes in must come out rule and the same column names. And as far as approach goes, you don't fall for the trap of starting to build your iterative output too soon in your workflow. You need to leave that till last as a general rule of thumb. And go and create an end condition for your iterations generally with the true or false is the best way to do it. And last of all, beware that you can use that iteration number in your constants. So hopefully you've enjoyed that presentation, and I'll hand back to the moderator and we'll answer some of those questions.